Hello, this is the second in a three-part webinar series titled DevOps Disruptors. Across the series, we are going to be looking at a report by the analyst firm Omdia exploring platform engineering as an emerging organizational approach and how it may be disrupting DevOps. I'm Nick Peacock. I'm Senior Director of Customer Success here at Cloudsmith. And momentarily, I'm going to be joined by two experts who between them have at least a couple of decades experience implementing and managing DevOps across a number of organizations. We're going to be discussing, and you'll be hearing about their own journeys, experiences in DevOps and platform engineering, and how they are reacting to changes in environments and changes of business objectives. Using the maturity model that the Omdia report uses, we're going to discuss how to assess your organization's maturity in DevOps and platform engineering, and how you make necessary changes. With that, we're going to try to keep it all within the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to be calling for some audience participation, so please feel free to join in and answer any questions. A couple of quick plugs. If you missed the first session, please go back and have a listen. It was hosted by Glenn Weinstein, the Cloudsmith CEO, who hosted Alan Carson, the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Cloudsmith, and Humanitech's VP of Product and Growth, Luca Galante, where they dug into and debated the points that were raised by the authors of the report. And if you're not already registered for the next in the series and the last rounds, you can see the banner at the bottom here. It takes place on the 21st of August at 12 p.m. ET. Either scan the QR code or go to cloudsmith.com. Our VP of Product, Alison Selecki, and Rob Godfrey, Senior Technical Architect at the Financial Times, are going to be discussing that with the evolution of DevOps. There's going to be a focus to and shift to creating internal development platforms. And how you offer self-service capabilities to developers. But on that note, I want to welcome our panelists, Richard Vodden, who is the VP of Technology at Humanizing Autonomy, and Dave Brasheshi, who is Senior Manager at PagerDuty. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking part. So, Dave, I'm going to start with you. As a leader in SRE and DevOps at PagerDuty, what can you tell us about what DevOps means to you? And how did you come about platform engineering as an approach or methodology?
Well, I think one of the interesting things when I started at PagerDuty was an environment here was a lot different from other places that I've been to, where it fully embraced, this was years ago, the full service ownership model. So there was, code it, ship it, own it. Teams were running fully operational autonomous services. And that, to be honest, that was gotten to be a bit of a problem. I think maybe when you're in a growth mode and you're under 100 developers, as we were at the time, it's okay if you have multiple data stores running around, or if you have teams running their own container schedulers in certain circumstances. But as we were growing, we found that that was not going to be scalable. And I think one of the things I did, and I was encouraged to do, was to go around and talk to stakeholders and talk to other folks in engineering, managers, senior and individual contributors, and say, like, hey, what can we do to help, right? Like, what can infrastructure do to help you? And so getting that feedback from the folks who are your customers, your internal customers, was critical, because one of the things that they kept saying was, we want more standardization, we want more paved roads. And that's kind of what we've been building towards, because I think sometimes the DevOps model can be, I've heard of some organizations, some folks that came to PagerDuty, where they have, the self-sufficient teams with embedded SREs. So that could be one direction you can go, right, as you grow, whereas just like you make the teams fully autonomous. But I think what we wanted to do was different, which was to provide centralized capabilities that could be shared by the rest of the organization. And so that's what we started building towards. And we, progressively, we would do customer interviews every year. Last year, we started doing developer surveys too. And so getting that feedback internally to make sure that we were on the right track, but also trying to stay current with the trends that were going around in terms of what's out there for infrastructure, but also being guided by our own vision of what we wanted to provide to the org. It's a combination of all those things. And so I think we stumbled into platform engineering because I think I mentioned to you and Richard before is that, went to KubeCon last year, and I was like, whoa, this is what we've been trying to do, and you're kind of seeing it play out, and it's an actual thing, and there's a discipline, and CNCF has written documents about it. So I think we've been trying to do platform engineering without knowing that it's what the title is. But also, I think the thing I want to stress is I think it's it's what our organization needs and wants. So I think that maybe to answer your original questions, part of what you need to figure out about your DevOps journey is what is the need that you need to satisfy for your organization, and that could be different based on the organization. It could be different at different times for the same organization. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's interesting. You spoke a lot about the kind of the internal team collaboration and aspiration for standardizing and creating centralized capabilities. There sounds like there was an inflection point there. Was that kind of a natural inflection point, or was that like a formal process? Did someone stand up at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning and say, "Hey, we need to do platform engineering, or we need to do better"? What did that kind of inflection point look like for you?
I wouldn't say it was an epiphany of any sort on anybody's part. It was very gradual, and it was very gradual depending on the teams too. We had some teams that at first really embraced it's like, take our data stores. We don't want to run a container scheduler, right? Like at the extremes, right? Like they were willing to give up some of their autonomy in order to have less operational burden and to have sort of distributed expertise, or have us be able to have capabilities that could be shared across the org. Other teams are a bit more reluctant, right? They didn't want to give up their own ability to control the technologies that they were using. But over time, I just think, you use metrics and you use surveys to show that there's a productivity advantage, and there's also a morale advantage to making this shift, especially as you're growing. It's just, you can't have, as you're scaling from, at the time when I started, we were about 400 people. Now we're like 1,400, right? And so from 100 developers to 400 developers. So at that scale, at those scales, it just wouldn't make sense to keep going the same way that we were going. And I think now there's not even a question really. It's like, take more of our abstract more things away from us, give us more centralized capabilities. Like we don't want to worry about this stuff. So I think it's gradual. I don't think there was something that was a top down, or that was sort of everyone woke up and said like, yes, we're going to do it this way tomorrow. It took time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know I asked the question around an inflection point, but it doesn't seem to be any single point. It was a kind of a gradual thing as you scaled. And Richard, I know like you and the guys that help Humanizing Autonomy are scaling. Did you implement platform engineering from the start based on growth from other businesses? How did that? I keep wanting to call it an inflection point, but how did that journey kind of work for you?
We definitely didn't do it from the start. I joined about just over 2 years ago, which was, I think, 3 years into the company's journey. So we're now about 5 years old, if I've got the numbers right. We're 22 people, so a kind of order of magnitude down from where you are, Dave. And traditionally, you might think that actually platform engineering has no relevance at that kind of size. And I'd certainly take that as an argument, even if I strongly disagree with it. I think Dave hit the nail on the head around what DevOps is, the code it, ship it, own it bit. Is absolutely what that is about. We're no longer having a dev team and an ops team. That's what it is. It's that portmanteau of dev and ops. And an innate kind of conclusion of that is you end up having teams that need to have all of the capabilities that team needs to be able to deliver up to a point. And it's that up to a point where platform engineering becomes really interesting. So one extreme example might be, do you have an air conditioning engineer in your dev team for when the data center aircon fails? No, of course you don't. And in that particular instance, you've kind of taken the ultimate platform engineering approach of buying a SaaS, presumably. I mean, I guess we're probably all using cloud. And at that stage, a cloud provider is basically, or even Cloudsmith, a SaaS product. Absolutely, that is a platform. And what we're talking about here is building internal platforms. And I think to build on what Dave was saying, there are two parts that kind of, to me, say you are doing platform engineering and you're not just doing engineering, if you see what I mean. The first one is that platform team must be absolutely focused on self-service. So what we don't want to do is go back to the days of having, one team raise a ticket on another team and get them to do some work. Like, let's say we've got a database team. You don't want your dev team raising a ticket on the database team saying, please, can you raise me a database, please? That's just an ops team, right? That's not a platform team. So what they should be doing, in my opinion, and what I found very, very effective, even at the tiny scale, and I'll get onto exactly how it works in a second, by empowering the dev team to create a database without needing the knowledge to know how to create a database, you get that standardization that Dave was talking about, because it's the database team that control the bit that creates the database. They're all created in exactly the same way, but you don't get that handoff. So the dev teams get to decide when the database is created and when it is destroyed and when it's powered up and when it's, you can add features to it. And the other thing which I found particularly effective, and a mark of platform engineering, and we see it in SaaS providers as well, is this idea of inner sourcing. Dave, you talked about autonomy and control. And I think, dev teams not wanting to let go of that autonomy and control. One thing we've done really, really well at Humanizing, and also in a couple of other organizations I've worked in, is you basically open source the product internally. You say, here is the platform, there is the source code. If you want autonomy and control, you want a feature, the platform team can't deliver it in time, raise a PR. And so if you have that sense of openness and collaboration combined with that sense of self-service first and kind of an almost complexity firewall, then you're doing platform engineering. Even if you're doing it as one guy writing a Terraform module that's driven by YAML files, which is very much the stage we're at Humanizing, that's still platform. It doesn't have to have a fancy GUI and a load of pretty metrics behind it. Does that answer the question? I think it kind of does.
I think it does, yeah. I think the kind of takeaway I have is that the principles of platform engineering are not different really to the fundamentals of DevOps. It is still code it, build it, ship it, but it is a shift in the paradigm with the problem you were solving, I guess probably back in 2009, probably when DevOps really started to rear its head. It was to try to provide centralized services for a whole organization as it scaled in complexity or size. Platform engineering is the, I guess, the older, more experienced brother or sibling of that function, where, okay, well, we've proved that we can build these things, but now the developer teams want greater ownership. They want greater collaboration. You can't have a condition every single team. So you obfuscate those out. And I think it was microphone, so to speak. I think a big piece here is how do you know where to start? How do you say, okay, well, I haven't yet solved my nirvana of DevOps yet. How do I evolve myself into a platform engineering function? I guess the not so simple question I'm going to pose to you both is, where do you start? Or where did you start?
We started...
and maybe let me give you some guides.
Okay.
Sure. So I say maybe give us a guide. Is it tooling first? Is it process first? Is it culture first?
I've never done it tooling first. I'm not saying that doesn't work. It's not an approach I've ever tried. The way I tend to look at it, if we are in a situation where we're going to do platform engineering, which, as Dave alluded to, is not something that's ever really happened. I think platform engineering is more of a natural evolution of what DevOps is. What I look at is the proportion of time the team, let's assume you're running a team. You look at that team, look and measure the proportion of time they're spending on roadmap versus spending on things aside from roadmap. John Cutler calls it LODO, or lights on doors open. Also heard it called toil. And that it's going to happen, but if it's more than kind of 10% of what you're doing, then there's kind of an alarm bell there in my mind. And you'll start thinking, actually, maybe we've got too much to do here. Maybe we've got a body of work here that somebody should be giving ownership of. And it might be within the team even. You kind of have a little platform team within your platform team, or within your dev team. And then it's ticket analysis. What is that toil? When I was at EMED, the huge thing was database snapshot restores. I think we had something stupid like 6,500 tickets in the DevOps backlog, whatever a DevOps backlog is. And about a third of them were, can you please restore this database snapshot, please? And so there's a very, very obvious place to start. And that is often the case in my experiences. There are real pain points that are exactly that handoff that DevOps is trying to move away from. And you can tackle those in a API first kind of way, to the extent that I've even written APIs which just raise Jira tickets, so that you get the API sorted for the dev team to be able to interact with it, and then it's done manually while you sort the automation out in parallel. Dave, where did you start from?
Well, I think one of the things I really like about working in infrastructure that also makes it really hard is that you are not only engineers, you're also product managers a lot of times, and salespeople and marketers internally, because your customers are inside. And you don't have those functions as part of your infrastructure work typically. So a lot of it falls onto you as managers, but also onto your engineers, right? Like the program management, project management, product management functions are all within your org. So my roundabout way of answering this question is, like, you have to figure out that you asked which one would you start with first, and I think part of my answer would be it could be more than one. So one of the first things I mentioned was I started talking to folks around the leaders around the org to try to figure out where the pain points are, right? So that's key. You want information from your customer base to understand what it is, like what the high leverage things you can address can fix. But also you listen to your own team and the expertise you have from folks who know infrastructure. So one of the things my folks on my team were telling me is that this was years ago, and they're like, we need to implement infrastructure as code, because at the time all we were doing was EC2 instances provisioned via chat ops and Slack, that kind of thing. And they're like, and I said, okay, well, let's do it. So we brought in Terraform, right, like via Atlantis, and as far as CD tooling. And when we did that, we that enabled us to allow developers to self-service infrastructure within AWS directly, rather than using the CLI or rather than using the console. And by doing that, our adoption of AWS managed services and the efficiencies that were gained by the developers increased a lot. So that in that aspect, we started with tooling first. We were like, we have to onboard Terraform in order to unlock these capabilities for our developers. But we also had other initiatives where you're like, okay, they're like, oh, our builds are too slow, our deploys are too slow. That's what we were getting from the, we want to be able to create services, not take a month. We want it to take a week, right? So we can address those as well. So you can do a mix of both. Obviously, you don't have unlimited folks on your team because there's so much you can do. Sometimes you want unlimited folks, but I think it can be a mix of approaches depending on what the needs are of your business, and that's up to you to figure out. And I think that's probably one of the tough parts, but also one of the parts I like about the job is that, we have that level of autonomy, or the level of, we can do the level of responsibility, but also the impact is really great. That's what I like about working in infrastructure, is your impact isn't just one feature you're shipping. Almost everything you do has impact across the organization.
I worked in a place that had a career ladder. And it talked about the impact of individual engineers at different ranks being part of these ranks. And at principal level, it was regularly makes changes which have a significant impact across the organization. And I'm like, my juniors are doing that every day. It's like, that's a fantastic place to work, isn't it?
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I think that, again, that kind of resonates. It sounds like with the pair of you, where you're trying to solve a problem, maybe a kind of a transactional problem at scale with the process of building and delivering software, whether that's kind of for distributing to other companies or just internal software or internal processes. I guess I want to take I want to change tact a little bit and say, how has this change that you've been delivering, and how has that impacted your need to change to a platform engineering team, or whatever kind of name or methodology we put against to it? I think in the modern world with I'm not going to use AI as a buzzword here, but with more kind of generative software development, people are using and deploying to containers more frequently. You're deploying to Kubernetes environments, pulling and using more open source software than ever before. I think the breadth and scope of software kind of in control and software under use by organizations is just a kind of skyrocket, right? It's exponentially more sophisticated, complicated, much larger. How has that scaled? Not necessarily with the organization in terms of number of developers or number of problems. How do you think the evolution of software has impacted what DevOps is or what platform engineering becomes from DevOps?
I think, if you don't mind, I can answer first. I think one way I can answer your question is you have to have standards. So you have to restrict. Richard talked a lot about self-service, but you have to restrict what the capabilities are of that self-service in order to provide, you can't provide a platform that's a platform for everything and that anyone can get any software they want at any time, because that's not supportable. It's not sustainable. You need to say, we're going to focus on these things. This is the menu that you get, and we're going to optimize that menu. So you get all these things out of the box when you self-service this thing, whether it's software or a platform or a capability in some way, shape, or form. So I think that one of the key things, and again, that was a tough thing to do transitionally, where everybody was used to just saying, I need this technology, so therefore I'm going to use this technology to, okay, now I have a limited menu of things I'm going to do, but they're going to be well supported, right? So I think that's the key, is there a cultural transition that can occur where people realize that having this self-supported or this well-supported technology is better than me being able to self-service, even though it may not fit 100% of my use case, it fits 90%, and I get all these extra things for free, right? It's the same thing as us buying a managed service from the cloud, right? Maybe it's not 100% of everything that we wanted, but there's a reason why we're not running something on-prem. There's advantages to it most of the time. But in this case, I think that has a lot to do with it. You have to restrict, and I think the thing I want to add to the self-service bit that's tricky, and I think is part of what's hard about platform engineering, is you have to figure out how far to abstract. And that's a tricky thing too, right? So it's not just you're not self-servicing 100% of everything. There's certain things that you want the developers to not care about because it's inefficient for them. And also the expertise you have is in-house. Like the infrastructure team will have more expertise on certain things. So, how far do you want to get? Do you want to get to, I saw this talk at KubeCon last year from Tim Hansen at Spotify, where it was like, they just have 4 YAML files. It's like, one's a build YAML, one's a deploy YAML. And that sounds awesome. Like I want, but we're a ways away from that, right? We're sort of in Terraform module land right now, which is tricky because then developers need to know Terraform. But we want to abstract Terraform away from the developers. We kind of do, but it's a long journey. And then how much bang for the buck are you going to get? So you have to figure that part out of it too. And I'm not sure. I may have taken your question in a different direction, Nick, so I apologize, but hopefully I kind of answered it.
I think
so. Yeah. Go on, Richard.
Oh, cool. I think you nailed it. In I guess opinionated self-service is what I'd describe it as, where you're like, okay, you're not just able to buy anything you want. You can only buy the things that we sell, I guess, which an approach I found to kind of keep it under control is you have some non-negotiables, and one of the tenets of platform engineering is kind of as a product, right? So we don't want to tell people they have to do things. We want to compel them to use it. The platform should be so amazing that everybody wants to use it. But again, you got to do that within certain constraints. So what I've found is actually if you constrain the code repository and you say, right, you must put your code in whatever code repository provider. You must put your artifacts obviously in Cloudsmith because you wouldn't ever consider any other artifact product. You must use our cloud account. if you're building a SaaS product, and then your alerts must end up in, let's say, PagerDuty. And those are your 4 non-negotiables, right? And then the platform team provide almost approved ways of working, off-the-shelf products that get you from your code repository into Cloudsmith. And like you might have, right, we've got a Python one, we've got a C++ one, we've got a JavaScript one. And then if somebody wants to do something else, they're free to. And that's a great way of giving you a metric that says what proportion of the organization actually are making use of the products that we've provided. How effective is it? And also it means that you're not stuck on the rails. You're not kind of going, oh, we're only going to use, I don't know, poetry for Python because that's what we've done. Someone can come along and say, oh, actually, I think this other Python build tool is amazing. I'm going to give it a try. They try it. It works. And there's a clear route to upstream because you've got it kind of, you're not building something that's so tightly coupled that it's got no flexibility at all. And then you can elevate that, but it will get enthusiasm and will encourage it. And you're no longer saying, don't do that. You're saying, no, crack on. Give it a go. See if it works. By the way, we require from an interface between code and artifact there to be a tag on the commit and that tag to match the version number in Cloudsmith. You go, this is what your contract is that you must adhere to, and then let them innovate, let them crack on. And then if it's good enough, upstream it, go, this is fantastic, and let them then effectively become the product owner for that product as it grows. And they're still like, this was my idea and it's grown up. And that's very, 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 very powerful. And helps kind of almost present an illusion of freedom, if you like, because by the time you've spent 18 months, 2 years working on these off-the-shelf components, they are so amazing and so whizzy and so clean that actually it's a pretty tough hurdle to build something that's better. It does definitely happen though. And it's an amazing feeling when it does happen. You get a contribution from a team that are sort of 2 levels of indirection away from infrastructure. Like, oh, I've built this thing that deploys RDSs and it only takes 4 minutes, not 8. You're like, oh, that's cool. I remember at EMED when we got the first PR to our platform, that was such an exciting moment. And Nick, you were talking about sort of cultural things to look for. That's really one where it's no longer the case that the platform team own the platform. The platform team are like museum curators. They're there to sort of to help people get around the platform and to make their experience as easy as possible. But it's not really their museum. The museum is the museum of the people. It's not really platform team's platform. It is the platform of the company, if that makes sense.
It does. It's interesting. What kind of keeps coming back to me is that there's an element of maturity here, whether this is kind of a maturity of tooling, of process, of organization. Coming back is that kind of culture and process. Does one lead the other, or does the other lead the other? Like, does the culture lead the processes? Does the process lead the culture? And I think that's different for different companies. I'm sure, Richard, how you operate is different from Dave, but no less or no more. I guess my next question that I'll pose to you both and pose to everyone in a poll as well is, how mature do you feel like your organization's processes are? I won't necessarily get you to speak about the good and the bad and the ugly, or let any external kind of secrets out into the world. But maybe just speak in general in terms of kind of the maturity of a process versus the maturity of a culture that is willing to hand over the reins to a platform engineering team to solve those problems that traditionally potentially developer teams have tried to solve themselves or wanted to own. I think maybe Richard, this is the maybe first punt for you.
I think if you have the right culture, you don't need process at all, which is a controversial thing to say, and that's probably an extreme end, and I'm not sure anyone ever quite gets to that extreme. I think, for example, you talk about ownership there, and you talk about the platform team owning problems and solving them. I think if the culture is right, there should be a sense of collaborative ownership between the dev team and the platform team, and it shouldn't be a sense of, oh, this is the platform team's problem, they need to go and solve that because that's not ours anymore. But that's obviously, you know, a pretty impressive place to have got to, and certainly not something I've ever fully achieved. And I think process is a helpful way to provide guidelines and guardrails around areas where you perhaps can't rely on your culture to for all kinds of reasons. There might be regulatory reasons why you can't just go, oh, no, the culture's fine, we can do this, because you know, certainly if I said to an accounting system, you know, oh, we're just going to rely on culture, we're not going to do any process, then that would not wash. And however, I think if you imagine taking it to an extreme where you have, I mean, you've got here fully matured and optimized processes. What are those processes? Are they really, are we now coding by numbers? Have we taken all of the decision making away from the developers? And I feel like there's a sweet spot, or a sweet zone, I guess, because it's definitely not a single point, where you've got some situations, for example, our production system has gone down. None of our customers can get to any of their information. That's a situation where you really need a process. It can be as light touch or as complex as you like, but something needs to be there to say, okay, what you do is you do this. This gets you an incident manager assigned. This is what happens after that. Bang, 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 bang. And that's about expediency more than anything else. And then there might be other situations, like we want to experiment with a new way of building Python, to pick my analogy up before, and that's something where you can let the culture rely on the let the sort of naturally evolving process come out of the culture, if you see what I mean. So I think in an ideal world, process is culturally led. However, that's a idyllic utopia that probably doesn't exist anymore. And in reality, you know, regulation exists for good reason, and process kind of has to cover that off. And also, there are situations sometimes where you just don't have time to let the culture work out what to do. And so, yeah, you kind of do need to do that. Dave, sure, with an organization a couple of orders of magnitude bigger than mine, you've got a slightly different view.
I can't say I strongly disagree with you, though. I mean, I think the challenge for us, like if I say culturally speaking, we have embraced whatever platform engineering means today, or DevOps, et cetera. But what I could tell you pragmatically is, like, we just don't have enough folks to implement all the things in the platform that we would like to have. Like, and is that a process question that I would like more headcount? But, you know, because there's all sorts of cool things that we could unlock for the organization to say, like, hey, we could do all this stuff for you. There's only so many things we can do with the people that we've got. So I think culturally speaking, people are bought into, like, yes, provide us more things out of the box, abstract more things away from us, give us ability to self-service more things. But there's only so much we can provide in any given year. And to Richard's point about regulation, I mean, going through the FedRAMP authorization process has really, you know, like, if you want your platform, your self-determined platform standards to seem less onerous, then go through a compliance or regulation process, because then you'll look like less bad, right? Like, you'll say, like, hey, look, at least you don't have to go through all this other stuff. I mean, I think for all the things that FedRAMP can unlock for us, it is added a lot of compliance work that we have to do in our software development lifecycle process, and that does impact the process, and maybe to a certain extent the culture, because we can't. We still encourage experimentation. It's just the question is, when you want to get that experiment into something like a production environment, now it's a little bit more challenging, right? Like, there's a lot more things you have to go through, so that does slow things down. Can slow things down a bit. So that is a culture impact, right? So as you grow and you make these business decisions, but that's the decision the business has decided, you know, going to open up the federal market for ourselves, not just the federal market, but there's a lot of other customers who are like, hey, if you're FedRAMP certified, then you don't have to worry about, you know, other compliance or security certifications, et cetera. It's sort of like the gold standard, especially for a lot of companies here in the US. So there's a lot of things that it unlocks for the business, and it makes a lot of sense, but there is an impact to your software development lifecycle that you need to acknowledge and somewhat embrace, right? Like there's certain things that FedRAMP has forced us to do, like we have a great vulnerability management program now. Like all of our, things get patched regularly. People keep their softwares up to date a lot more than we did before. I mean, people would be, 3-4 years old libraries that they hadn't worked on a service in a while. They bring it in, and all of a sudden they're spending 2 weeks just trying to resolve dependencies. It happens less frequently now. So there are some benefits that are provided by going through this, but it's all intertwined, I guess is what I'm saying, Nick. It's hard to tease one out from the others.
That is a great platform, though, isn't it? Where you're saying, we've got all this regulatory nonsense that we have to go through so that we've got this compliance. If you use our platform, you only have to worry about this bit of it, not that bit. If you do your own thing, you're welcome to come to the audit with us. See how quickly.
Well, exactly, right? Because I think now the problem is folks have to jump through a lot of hoops to get these exceptions, right? Yeah. So they just end up using me. Now, does that make you lazy as a platform provider? It shouldn't, right? I mean, your goal ultimately should be to serve your customers in the business, and so you just have different constraints to work under. But like you said, it does make. I think it puts the onus on you though to say, can we abstract more so that maybe the pain is lessened for those folks that need to use the platform that we're providing, because now everybody has to use it. Right. So what can we do that's going to have the most impact throughout the organization? So it kind of shifts the way you look at things, but I don't think it shifts our mission.
Do you find it tricky? Oh, sorry, Nick, if I can ask you a question. Given you're in a regulatory position and you kind of do have that organizational mandate where people have to use your platform, how do you stay honest and keep it product led and keep it compelling and not kind of go, oh well, everyone has to use it. We don't need to make it awesome.
I mean, we have great people working in the org. I want to start with that, right? Like we don't have folks who are just want to punch the clock and check. There's people who are really legitimately interested in advancing our platform and advancing the technology. And the other part, I can't stress, it's not just, there's multiple aspects to figuring out how effective you're being. And one of them is, I think, talking to your customers. So developer surveys, interviews with folks, speaking to folks around the org, seeing where their pain points are. That never should change. Like you should always be getting feedback from the users and subjective feedback. So if you look at all the DORA and space metrics stuff, they all say you need that subjective feedback to round out the metrics, but you also need the metrics, right? So I hadn't mentioned before. So it's like, where are we, our deployment times going up, or is our cycle time going up? Is like, what can we do to help fix that? I don't know. I guess it's hard to answer your question. Theoretically, I suppose you could just kind of mail it in. I'm luckily, I don't think that's the type of folks that we have here. In fact, it's hard because I feel like folks want to do more. And I think that's the challenge sometimes like I said before, I wish we had more people because we could provide more to the org, because people want to give more, provide more to capabilities as part of the platform. And, I think that's the challenge with when you're infrastructure and platform engineering, you have a certain level of keep the lights on work that you have to do. And so if your organization is smaller, the percentage of keep the lights on work that you have to do is maybe higher than you'd like. And you can't invest in the platform capabilities as much as you'd like. And I think there's a bit more keep the lights on work that comes with a higher regulatory environment, unfortunately. And so I think that's where the impact comes in. And I think that's sometimes where it can be hard to find a good balance.
Joe, I appreciate that, Dave and Richard. There's always ask. There seems to be this synonymous piece with regulation breeds the need for platform engineering, or whatever you may call it, right? This kind of cultural process and tooling alignment where you're all driven by one North Star objective and goal, which is compliance against some regulation. And that, for better or worse, kind of drives a very kind of single-minded view of, okay, well, we need to prioritize this piece of our work this quarter of this month. And that's certainly, I think, David, you've been talking about this for a number of months with us around FedRAMP compliance is really important. And so if we can all leverage that kind of single focus to do this organization, a lot of these, a lot of the requirements kind of look and feel like platform engineering. Maybe just in the last 90 seconds or so, leave people with a bit of kind of practical advice. Maybe Richard, let's start with you. Kind of in 30 seconds or 45 seconds or less, what advice would you give to people or to others or friends in an organization to do things better, to focus themselves on making something better, or by making a shift to platform engineering?
I think the single most important thing is to have a metric, be it ENPS, be it satisfaction, something like that, which just measures how much your users like your product, your platform. And if that's going up, you're doing something right. If that's plateauing or going down, you're doing something wrong. Dave, I hope I haven't stolen your answer.
No, that was a really good answer. I would say listen to your customers and don't get hung up on terminology. Because if you start saying like, oh, I have to do platform engineering or I have to do DevOps, just make sure it's serving the needs of the business and not the other way around.
I love that. I think kind of identifying and using the metric, use the developer survey, NPS, build times, whatever it may be, find your North Star metrics. Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining with us. One last thing before we go. If you haven't registered for the last in the series, you can use the banner below that's just appeared, or go to cloudsmith.com. Again, Dave, Richard, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be speaking again over the next couple of weeks, but appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.